sure most of you have already seen the exhibition, but just a very, very brief introduction to the Kasauli Art Centre. It was founded by the artist Vidya Rao at his family home, Ivy Lodge in the Kasauli Hills in Himachal Pradesh. And from 1976 till 1991, so almost 15 years, the Kasauli Art Centre held artist workshops, painting, sculpture, multimedia, seminars and symposia on film and critical theory, but also experiments in theatre making, and all of it within the premises of this family home, the grounds and the home itself. All of these activities actually underlined Vivan's belief in interdisciplinarity and also art making as a practice of collectivity and dialogue. The exhibition closes tomorrow evening, so we hope that you will be able to go through it because there's a lot of videos, interviews, letters to be read, and a lot of very rare archival material that has been drawn from Vivan's personal papers. This evening, we're actually delighted to have with us Nilima Sheikh and Anuradha Kapur, both of whom were an integral part of the Kasauli Art Centre. Anuradha will give a talk, followed by a conversation with Nilima that will be moderated by Indira Chandrasekhar. And there will be time for questions and answers at the end. So before I hand over to Indu, a brief introduction. Indira Rao, or Indu as we all know her, Chandrasekhar, is the publisher and managing editor of Tulika Books, New Delhi, and has been associated with Indian publishing since the early 1980s. She set up Tulika Books, a small independent publisher of academic books in the social sciences and humanities in 1995. And the authors published by Tulika include some of India's best-known intellectuals, theorists, and academics. And over the years, it has developed a niche list of books in the arts and cultural studies, several of them published in association with art institutions. And publications under a joint imprint with the Sher-Gil Arts Foundation, SSAF, that has curated and produced this exhibition, are the latest of such collaborations. Indu is also a founding partner of IPDA, the Independent Publishers Distribution Alternatives, a distribution network to promote alternative and independent publishing in India, as well as a member of the Paris-based International Alliance of Independent Publishers. Along with Anuradha, she's also a managing trustee of the Sher-Gil Arts Foundation. So over to you, Indira.
Thank you, Nayika, for that rather overwhelming introduction. Just to say that it's a delight, a pleasure to be here. My first visit to Arthshila, of course, and it's a wonderful space. I hope to see more of it tomorrow. Now, without much ado, to introduce the first speaker for this evening, Anuradha Kapur. I'll read out a formal introduction. Anuradha Kapur is a theatre maker and teacher. Her theatre work has travelled nationally and internationally, and she has taught in theatre schools and universities in India and abroad. She is a founder member of Vivadi, a working group of theatre practitioners, visual artists, filmmakers, musicians, and writers. And you'll hear more about Vivadi later this evening as we converse. Vivadi seeks to do interdisciplinary work and attempts exchange between practice and research. Vivadi's works have ranged from performance sculpture and installation projects to working on actors' biographies, to texts devised by Geetanjali Shree, to works of modern Indian playwrights and translations of Kuo Pao Kun. Have I got that right, Anu?
Yeah.
Shakespeare, Ibsen, Brecht, Heine Müller, among others. Her writings on performance have been widely anthologized, and her book, Actors, Pilgrims, Kings and Gods, The Ram Leela at Ramnagar, was published by Sher-Gil Books in 93, Calcutta, reprinted in 2004. Anuradha Kapur was invited to curate the performance window for Body City, citing contemporary culture in India, presented at the House of World Cultures, Berlin in September 2003. She co-curated the theatre section of the Serendipity Arts Festival Goa in 2016 and 17, and at the International Festival, Theatre Festival of Kerala, ITFOK. Anuradha Kapur served as Director, National School of Drama, New Delhi from 2007 to 2013, 2013, where she was also Professor of Acting and Direction. Her writings on performance have been widely anthologized, and her book, Actors, Pilgrims, Kings and Gods, The Ram Leela at Ramnagar, was published by Sher-Gil Books in 93, Calcutta, reprinted in 2004. Anuradha Kapur was invited to curate the performance window for Body City, citing contemporary culture in India, presented at the House of World Cultures, Berlin in September 2003. She co-curated the theatre section of the Serendipity Arts Festival Goa in 2016 and 17, and at the International Festival, Theatre Festival of Kerala, ITFOK. Anuradha Kapur served as Director, National School of Drama, New Delhi from 2007 to 2013, 2013, where she was also Professor of Acting and Direction. Anuradha has been visiting professor at Ambedkar University, Delhi, University of Warwick, and Cape Town University. Over to you, Anu.
Thank you so much for this introduction. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to be here and to share some thoughts with you about performance. It's a wonderful space to be in here, and it's of course wonderful to be in Santiniketan. It's always something that in my imagination I look forward to coming more often, but I haven't managed. I'm going to talk about performance in quotes that we did in, is this all right? That we did in Kasauli. And for me, working on that project defined in many ways another view on performance, but it also made me re-look at one's own habitual imaginations about what we think performances are, or how we make them. So this is a series of thoughts about many breakings in physical terms, but many mental changes and redirections that happened during the making of the project. I'll read this out and then maybe we talk about it. I want to put down in this talk some reflections on the performance event called The Fall of the Slab, which was conceptualized by Vidya Sundaram. Is that better? Yeah. Which was conceptualized by Vidya Sundaram and actioned at Ivy Lodge in Kasauli in 2017. In the crepuscular light of a September evening that year, under the force of gravity and aided by drills and pulleys, the slab, an 18-foot by 12-foot section of a 60-foot into 15-foot concrete roof stage fell downwards, and in the blink of an eye crashed spectacularly into rubble. With this crash, a blueprint named the Kasauli Art Project KAP, we've now added S to it, so it's become SCAP, which is both a space and a future, was materially proposed. Around and amidst the dross and the rubble, the challenges of reconstruction also appeared. What lies underneath and what lies above the sites that are to be prepared for reuse and reconception. What also came to mind were the several valences of the word space. Space as physical phenomena, social practices, and symbolic ideas. Space as actual sensuous experience, including, and that's very special for Kasauli, skies, the body, kinship, and belonging. Let me give you a snapshot of the history of this fall of the slab. In 1987, when a row of outhouses at Ivy Lodge became leaky, a concrete slab replaced the old tin roof. This served as a magnificent platform that stretched out above the valley and seemed to float over it. Years later, the Canton Board of Kasauli finally ruled that the concrete roof did not accord with the building norms of Kasauli and had to be pulled down. Vidya Sundaram then conceptualized a performative event during which a section of the slab would be drilled before an audience and at a predetermined time or moment allowed to break off and crash downwards. As part of the slab had already been drilled a day before the performance, the part to be drilled for the fall of the slab was held in position by pulleys, chains and weights in order to dislodge it in front of the invited audience. Asim Waqif, installation artist and architect, lashed together bamboo structures on the section of the slab that was meant to remain unharmed after the segmented demolition had taken place. In the ruined outhouses under the slab, that is under the roof, he bound another thicket of bamboos that would hold or direct the falling concrete. Bamboos both above and below the slab invoked a growth and egression pushing through and against the concrete, but also straightaway brought to mind scaffolding that is put in place to support building works, except that this scaffolding was to function in reverse, to break the fall of the slab as it crashed from top to bottom. Hemant Sri Kumar set up a music station on the stage above, from where he played a complex musical score, parallel to the action of the fall. The stage was roughly painted by Anpu Garke, a graffiti artist, and when you look down on it, the optics were playfully askew, whether wall, floor, or roof. 4 performers, trained actors from the National School of Drama, who were interested in improvisation, action making, as well as acrobatics, insofar as they had the flair and the skill to climb the scaffolding, were invited to perform. They were Jilmil Hazarika, Sukumar Tudu, Bandana Rawat, and Mukti Das. They arrived 2 days in advance of the actual event. Neelam Man Singh Chaudhary and I sought to find a series of actions, texts, and vocality that had no given narrative. We therefore wanted no conventional rehearsal. All of us met and worked out a plan of actions. Thunder and heavy rain drenched almost all of the 2 days we thought we had for work. On the day of the performance, the rain ceased and the sky became brilliantly clear. Spectators invited from Delhi and Chandigarh had arrived in Kasauli over 2 days. They gathered at Ivy Lodge on 23 September and found seating on the ledges cut into the hillside. After this talk, you will see some images. As dusk fell, a brief text that the actors had improvised began to be spoken. Simple acrobatics were attempted on the bamboo structures. Hemant Sri Kumar's music, like a battery of sound, reshaped the space. Vivan Sundaram described its effects like that of a projectile, a sound rocket that ricocheted off the hillside, shot into the sky, and plunged into the valley. The actor's speech was completely and unexpectedly, it was a mixture of expectation and absolutely unexpected, was drowned by the music of Sri Kumar, but their actions gave a sense of the space as they saw it. Along with Vakif and a group of construction workers, they secured and added bamboos. They worked with the steps connecting one part of the hill to another, with the seats cut into the hillside on the perimeter of the concrete stage, on the edges of the slab that was about to be cut and demolished, on the edge of the slab from where you could jump into what was lower than the slab, what was called the pit, and to the outhouses that were in disrepair below. Thus they worked both above and below the concrete plain area. At a particular moment, the drills came on. The chains and pulleys, handheld and even improvised, kept the slab in place till the last part of the edge was expected to come free. The actors invited the audience to the space below the slab, handing them hard hats and goggles that they would be safe from the dust and falling rubble. The drills cut the concrete, and in a split second, the slab fell, dislodged the bamboos, and was held by a saria and hung precariously. In theatre history, the sub-stage, or what is called below the proscenium stage, from the time of the Victorian spectacular theatre until today, can be 4-story deep. Because it is actually under the ground, this below of the theatre is totally concealed. It is as mysterious as it is scientifically planned. The below synchronizes perfectly with the above, servicing, fabricating, assembling, and making possible the illusion that is unfolding up there. It can have nuts and bolts technology or more up-to-date electrical and electronic contraptions. Below the stage, pulleys must move curtains and objects and may be hand-worked or mechanically cranked or worked by an electric switch or an electronic pad. Trapdoors must open for ascending and descending. Actors must plunge, actors must rise. Whole houses or tableaus set up on mezzanine floors must disappear intact, either slowly or rapidly. There may be double the number of technicians and backstage workers below the stage than there are actors above. The register of labor and variations of skill below are quite different from those above. The below is coordinated to the last second and can afford no failure. Everything must function like clockwork. If a spectacle fails, it may go down in theatre history as a joke or a gaffe, or because even death could be a result, a tragedy. In Kasauli, when we stood below, in front of the outhouses which were under the slab, I thought, is this a cross-sectional view of a traditional theatre, now stripped bare to become concrete pylons, ruined stairs and dross? Did this flash across my mind? Did I imagine both levels to manifest a range of interconnections and associations, as it is done in conventional theatres, all of different registers of performance and skills being actioned? Indeed, this could possibly be imagined, for in their past, the lower outhouses had several kinds of impromptu relationships with the above, as green rooms, dressing rooms, carpentry workshops, stores for props, rehearsal spaces, and an improvised playing area, among others. The below and the above, as is usually the case, had been attached to each other by different strata of labor and practice. But then, thinking of the playing space of the slab atop the outhouses as the ruined above and below of a traditional illusionistic theatre is at the same time an impossibility, a kind of category mistake, because, as a matter of fact, this space is nothing like an illusionistic stage. The slab above could never have been used for conventional illusionism, even if the single story below served as dressing rooms. So I use this imagination of the cross-sectional view of a theatre as a trope here, to bring to mind the material effects and affects of theatre building for and in performance, to bring to mind that architectural geometries framing draggers and distances create protocols of labor and spectatorship, affect corporeal experiences and actions of performers and viewers, and shape narratives. Some actions made possible and some are rendered entirely impossible. Impossible as in prohibited, inconceivable, unimaginable, unexecutable by architecture. Architecture is always a maker of the performance, whether we recognize it or not. The changing meanings of the above and the below made the lashed bamboos at the slab waiting to receive falling concrete seem problematical. There was a discussion about how to light them. Should they look organic? Should they look as some sort of understructure and in use? The cut proposed a provocation through rupture. The catastrophic breakage altered both substantially and materially two levels of theatrical space, but also time. In an instant, space and time came to be synchronous as also non-synchronous. When they had worked in tandem, whichever protocol of the visible and the non-visible they had obeyed, there was one kind of relationship, and they were synchronous. When the line of the above and the below was demolished because of the fall of the slab, they became non-synchronous because they were relocated and described different material experiences. Paradoxically, architectural performance and theatre was brought together even as they were blown apart. Centrifugal and centripetal in the same instant, fragmented and then joined in a misaligned relationship. As spectators, we had a choice. From above, we could see the slab crashing downwards, leaving a gaping square, or we could go down and wait for the time to demolition, the crash and the collapse. A bringing together of two contrary forces, downward dragging and upward rising. John Simmel describes the ruin as a strained balance between two forces in which construction pulls upward and gravity pulls downward till the ruin finds equilibrium in rubble. Architecture, he writes, is the only art in which the great struggle between the will of the spirit and the necessity of nature issues into real peace, in which the soul, in its upward striving, and nature, in its gravity, are held in balance. In the ruin, however, nature eventually begins to have the upper hand. The brute, downward dragging, corroding, crumbling power produces a new form, entirely meaningful, comprehensible, differentiated. It seems to me that the fall of the slab provided a grammar or vocabulary, in a manner of speaking, for the transitioning of the Kasauli Art Centre to the Kasauli Art Project, that of simultaneously destroying and memorializing, of building and unbuilding, of breakage, shattering, fracturing, and of halting, of arresting, of pulling an imaginary break. The poetics of building and knocking down is in some senses a classic modernist trope. It is a statement about self-reflexivity, where the tensions between concealment and unconcealment, the ability to show and see the parts of the piece, are critical to the experience of the piece itself. Equally crucial is the engagement with the building in and of itself, its structural, brick and mortar aspect. In the work of the constructivists, as we know, and of Brecht, among many others, this is very important. By stripping down the theatre and unconcealing the light instrument, visible marks on the wall, chipping paint and brickwork, stage machinery, catwalks, ladders, grids and flies, pulleys and cranks, a performance is engineered. The material sensation, which is akin to the experience of being in a workplace or a testing ground. A puzzle, which I put out to you, something that agitated me a lot at that time and still does. The puzzle is, I seem to have imagined the fall in slow motion, as if the concrete would not thunder down like an avalanche, but instead come down, decelerated, and settle itself in the bamboos. Bend them, not break them. Shift them, but not destroy them. Here the slab fell as if bombarded. It tilted in a misshapen manner, dislodging and shattering the bamboos. Demolished, yet standing. Dangerous, incomplete, halfway between ruin and rubble. All of it probably took 5 seconds. What a profound miscalculation I had made. My thinking had so little an understanding of the material, that is concrete, and was so overwhelmed by habit, by an inherited imagination of the spatiality and the temporality of theatre, that I found myself entirely out of sync. Material articulates space, as in the materiality of architecture. I had not taken into account the weight of the concrete and its cataclysmic power. I had not taken into account that it was the cut and the crash that made the performance. I had not, strictly speaking, processed the fall, and I had inserted too quickly the human figure into the narrative. Whereas performance is and was, as Kathy Turner says, in describing site-specific works, the encounter between bodies and hillside, aided by technology, poetry, and an occasional, diminished, and fleeting live performer. What determined the performance clearly was landscape, chaos, and chance. And while I might seek to work with scenography, costume, design, body, object in my own practice, and see them as interlinked, rhizomatically, horizontally, in my own practice. Here I was overtaken by the shock of the action, unable to envisage the substance, the nitty-gritty of the experience itself. The oppositional energies of the performance breached the temporal layers, material remnants, and human experiences, and placed many facets of error before me, to tell me how an unexpected action may exceed by far the course of an imagined action, because an imagined action is ideologically shaped by habit and expectation. Therefore, implicit unalertness. This unalertness had illuminated for me the unknown, which appeared in profound opposition to the overall plan, the shock of which readied the space for the future. Thank you very much. So that is Asimbatov's structure. That's the slab. This is the structure being built, and then this part is in the performance. That's the slab broken on top and Vivan at the demolished site under. That's Raman taking images. This is what the slab used to look like, where we have rehearsed and performed many places. This is a 60 by 850 slab. And about where you see the actors is where the demolition happened. Yeah.
So we'll move to the next part of the evening, which is basically a conversation between the three of us, Nilima Sheikh, Anuradha Kapur, who have collaborated on several projects, starting with the Kasauli theatre projects or performance projects that they did. And I am just an interlocutor in this conversation. But before that, not that Nilima Sheikh needs an introduction to this audience, but I shall go through the pieces. Nilima Sheikh was born in 1945 in Delhi. After graduating in history at Delhi University, she trained in Baroda during 65 to 71. Her work focuses on displacement, longing, loss, roots, violence, the perception of tradition, and ideas of femininity. Her landscapes using tempera on handmade paper or canvas are influenced by Chinese, Persian, Central Asian, pre-Renaissance European and North Indian schools of tempera painting. Her visual and textual layering, often marked by a subtle mix of lore and history, offer glimpses of multiple worlds and a commitment to feminist realities. She has also been pushing for the sustainability of traditional methods and materials and engagement with the practices of traditional painters. For the last 5 decades, she has worked on paper installations, large scrolls and screens, paintings, illustrations for children's books, and theatre set design. Just a glimpse of the range of her work. She began exhibiting her work in 1969, and has participated in numerous group exhibitions, including the Imaginary Institution of Indian Art at the Barbican Centre, London in 2024, the most recent, Thinking Historically in the Present, Sharjah Biennial 15, Sharjah in 2023, Woman Is as Woman Does, CSMVS Museum, Mumbai 2022, Miniature 2.0, Pera Museum, Istanbul 2020, Dhaka Art Summit, Dhaka 2020, Kochi Muziris Biennale, Kochi 2018, Documenta 14 at Athens and Kassel 2017. Recent solo exhibitions include Terrain, Carrying a Cross, Leaving Behind at Gallery Kemold, Mumbai 2017 and Gallery Espas, New Delhi in 2018. Each Night, Put Kashmir in Your Dreams, Kemold Prescott Road, Mumbai 2010, Lalit Kala Academy, New Delhi 2010, and the Art Institute of Chicago 2014. The same show was shown in these 3 venues. Nilima Sheikh has written on art in books, journals, or as catalogue essays. She has illustrated books for children, as I already mentioned. In the 1990s, as part of a women's collective, Vivadi, that Anuradha mentioned, or I mentioned in my introduction to Anuradha, she designed for theatre productions, and these include, all directed by Anuradha Kapur, Nayika Bhed, Umrao, Sundari, An Actor Prepares, Navlakha. These productions were designed by Nilima in collaboration with Anuradha and others in the group. Collaborating with fellow artists and craftspeople from Srinagar, she made a large mural conjoining lands 50 feet by 180 feet for the airport in Mumbai in 2014. Some of you may have seen it in the international terminal at Mumbai Airport. Nilima has been awarded with several honors and tributes, and among her awards, a special one is the Abad Gagan Award by Vishwabharati University in 2011, and more recently the Nanjunda Rao Award by Karnataka Chitrakala Parishad in 2021. She was born in Delhi, she lives and works in Baroda. So now on to the conversation that we are talking, that we will, all three of us will, but mostly Nilima and Anuradha. The focus will be Kasauli, since the subject of the exhibition that most of you have already seen is the Kasauli Art Centre, Ivy Lodge at Kasauli, which housed the Art Centre. And the year is 1989. Towards the end of the spurt of activities that the Kasauli Art Centre witnessed, and the several workshops and seminars and conversations and productions that were staged at the Kasauli Art Centre. In 1989, in May of 1989, a group of practitioners, artists, theatre practitioners, academics, activists came together to, in a seminar and workshop, as well as theatre workshop, that took place simultaneously. The entire event was curated or convened by a colleague and a friend we all miss here together today, Kumkum Sangari, who was the brain behind the feminist representations of women seminar, representations of women, prescriptive and fictional texts, it was called. That was the seminar, and alongside that you had workshops, a theatre workshop and improvised theatre productions, which led to two improvised productions. One was Nayika Bhed and the other was a Hindi adaptation of Ghare, Baire. Conceptualized, as I told you, convened by Kumkum Sangari, but conceptualized collectively by a group in Delhi a few weeks probably before they came up to Kasauli. And this group included, besides Nilima Sheikh and Anuradha Kapur and Kumkum Sangari, whom I've mentioned, Shiba Chachi, Geetanjali Shree, Anamika Haksar, Vidya Rao, and others. If most of you who've seen the exhibition, the hall upstairs has actually still photographs of that seminar and workshop, as well as a video made by Navina Sundaram, who filmed the entire production, as it were, and had interviews with many of the participants, along with her crew from German television. So that is the only record, and a very rich record, a documentary record we have of that time. So the basic impulse for this group to come together, as it were, they had a kind of brainstorming session in Delhi before they came up, and the entire focus was on how women were represented in both fictional or fictive texts as well as prescriptive texts about women. And the idea was to discuss, so academics and activists were there alongside practitioners. and the focus was on collaborative practice. How do you collaborative think this issue through? And a group of practitioners from various arts, from an interdisciplinary approach, as it were, towards the issue. So my first question, and I'll set the ball rolling with this question and allow Nilima and Anu to take over, as it were. And somewhere in between, I would like to probably just read out Kumkum's own kind of manifesto-like statement about the seminar, how she conceived of it, but that will follow a little later when the conversation gets rolling. How did collaboration become the focus of your practice? Both Nilima and Anu agree that that Kasauli was the first instance of their collaborations together in the field of performance, and where Nilima comes in with her artistic inputs into the design of the theatre productions. Vidya Rao comes in with music. Geetanjali Shree comes in with her writing. She scripts most of those productions. And academics and activists who enter the discourse, as it were, of the central theme of the seminar and theatre production. So how important was collaboration, or the collaborative, as a concept and as a material reality for you to respond to? And how did that process, as it were, see itself through in Kasauli and in following years? Because Kasauli was just the beginning for both of them. They collaborated together on several productions after Kasauli, and I'd like them to tell you directly. Is that me? No. Okay. They'll tell you directly how exactly it came to be. Nilima, would you like to go first?
I think actually it should be Anuradha, but since I've got the mic in my hand, I'll start. You know, for me, I came from a town which was a wonderful town for an artist to be in and live in. But it was the notion of working, except if you were a sculptor and were working in a workshop-like situation, was that you do your work alone in your studios, unless you're working on a mural project or a sculptural project. And the other thing was that there wasn't significantly any women's movement to see happening or burgeoning in Baroda at the time, not in the university and not till later in the town. So for me to come to this seminar, to this informal discussion group that we had, which was mentioned in Delhi prior to our workshop together, was a huge eye-opener, also in some sense a vindication, because there were ideas that I had begun thinking about when I did paintings like Premchand and other works like that. But apart from that, it was a huge eye-opener, and it was wonderful to see how so many types of people working in different fields, as well as academics and activists, could think in tandem with each other and think of creating something together. So for me, that was a new experience in some ways, and because it was people who were talking to each other, not having necessarily experienced the same things, but being able to bring their experiences into conversation with each other. So I think that was what was so special for me to begin with.
Anu, would you like to add to that?
I think how the group came together. Yes. I think that there's a little sort of pre-story to this meeting, which in fact then was what started off our working in collaboration, was the fact that invited by Kumkum Sangari and Sudeshwar in 1979, we had done a lot of street plays, two actually that ran a long time. One was called Om Swaha, and the other was on that time, all the discussions on the rape law. And that had made us at that point think of many ways of thinking outside of the way theatre was made. And I think that in any case, the street theatre produces a certain sort of immediate language, which we worked quite closely on. It was Vidya Rao and I worked very closely in making those shows, including Urvashi and many groups called Sri Sangharsh and other groups that came together at that time. Now, that gave us some sense of working together with immediate issues, as is the case with street theatre. But that also made us want to, for instance, see how we can work together in situations where texts which are not issue-based can be developed together. And I think that was one sort of point, and that was in '79. But in the meanwhile, a series of conversations among friends about how to make work or our discomforts with particular proscenium-based theatres was also as it were, in our minds. But that is a small fragment of what led to Kumkum Sangari thinking about this, which you'll hear when Indu reads that, a relationship between activists, between theatre makers, between artists of other kinds, transdisciplinary moves. And so then we got together and talked about it. And at that time, really, as what Nilima has pointed out, it was a kind of like an illumination that we were all similarly placed in thinking about art making. And that all of us who were from the theatre were uncomfortable with the kinds of quite rigid lines of theatre making that had happened along our own studies or our own theatre experiences, and also, and I think that is critical, many of us who were working in theatre and who were women were quite concerned at the production or the construction of the director in the theatre. And I think it was a cross line at that moment, whether to think of, are there very many processes which is the marker of a theatre director, and are those processes singularly and unitarily fixed within the person, or can they be distributed? And I think that point for us became very important, that none of us who were working in the theatre and were women particularly wanted to be theatre directors of a certain kind, of a certain sort of individualized, personal, as well as authorial presence. So in some senses, the distribution of the authorial presence was the start of our discomforts with a certain kind of theatre practice, and then this began.
Yeah, just to also remind you, since many of you in the audience we're talking about the late 70s, early 80s, which was the high point of the women's movement in India. And the feminist movements, the various women's groups, and much of the activity, the discussion, the discourse was centered in Delhi, although of course other parts of India had their own manifestations of this concern about women's issues. Also the time when dowry deaths, bride burning, sati, etc. became volatile social issues that were debated and acted upon by practitioners and academics and activists along. I'll just read out to you very brief extracts from Kumkum Sangari's no, I think I can manage, yeah. I'll just read out to you what Kumkum has to say about the seminar. Maybe I'll keep it here, yeah. The seminar, of what her objective, what her concept was. The seminar on representations of women, prescriptive and fictional texts, 1989, took place at the close of a 5-week theatre workshop by Vivadi, Women's Repertory Company, in which 2 plays were produced, an adaptation of Tagore's Ghare, Baire, and a workshop improvisation titled Nayika Bhed. The innovative idea was to use the same base materials for the workshop and the seminar. Both of this took place, as I mentioned, almost simultaneously at Kasauli. Discussion, and through this double path of performance and academic analysis, to open up these materials simultaneously in their historical meanings and their contemporary potentials. A third interventionist current flowed from the active involvement of some workshop participants in the women's movement. The bringing together of academic styles of questioning with performance practices was an attempt to challenge and transform cultural representations. The tense yet fecund intersections between academic, activist and performative practices were part of the wider feminist ethos of the 1980s, and Kasauli Art Centre became a node where these comings together found a magical and reflective space. The trajectories of Indian feminist theory, historiography, pedagogy, polemic and activism were increasingly interanimated with art, theatre, film and writing practices from the 80s. Other kinds of collaboration were in the air too. And she goes on, and I'll just go to towards the end of the last paragraph of this brief text that, by the way, I'm reading from the book on the Kasauli Art Centre, which some of you may have seen. I think there's a copy of it available in the library here, and we'll leave behind a couple of copies, so those of you who are interested can surely browse through it, and Belinda will speak more about the book and the making of the book tomorrow. So this is a text that Kumkum wrote for the book. This rich but somewhat elusive event, and the event she's referring to is the seminar and workshop, theatre workshop, could be grasped at many affective and intellectual, personal and ideological levels that were not consolidated into a single overarching formulation and now seem to be flitting slivers with pasts and futures. And that is something I'm going to request Nilima to elaborate upon. The slivers that extend into the past and to the future, flitting between the past and the future in terms of her own practice. The dynamic circulation between distinct mediums and vocabularies, the energy of reinterpretation, the transfers between performative, academic and activist mediums, all this not only became more vivid in retrospect, but seeded several art and theatre projects by individuals and groups and contributed to a generative field of collective political challenge. Such circulation and collaboration produce an expanded field, as we see today, a process in which the Kasauli Art Centre was a significant catalyst. Simple question, Nilima, would you agree with that formulation of Kumkum's? How true does it hold for you in your continuing practice, the collaborative aspect of it, the regenerative aspect of your art making itself, and the process of collaborating with theatre makers, with Anuradha in particular, if you would like to expand a little more on that.
First of all, I think it was my sort of proximity or brush with working in theatre per se that was an eye-opener and made me understand the absence of the authorial, not even in the extended way that Anuradha has talked about in the context of women theatre makers, but also just in the practice of it. Nothing you made for it was yours. It was always in theatre, it's always in the context of something else. And that the form itself was quite miraculous in that way to a painter who had been used to making a discrete object which was signatorial, authorial in that sense. So that itself was the major thing. But of course, and I would like to acknowledge the role actually Anuradha had in making me aware of the possibilities of how theatre collaboration and then how collaborations per se could be conceived and structured and made into a productive process, which was very, very, very special. Now, I think that Anuradha will speak about the kind of progress of this in the theatre world. I'll talk about it in one context. In my work, it has been a catalyst in many ways that I've always liked to share my authorship in a small way or in a big way with other practitioners. A large mural that I've been part of the making of in Bombay was perhaps the most flamboyant and biggest aspect of that, because it has we had people from, besides B.V. Suresh, who's my collaborator in that, we had young artists in Baroda working along with us. But more than that, we had people from the artist community. I feel very unhappy saying artisan, but just to make you understand, people who worked with craft come in to be part of the kind of structuring of this mural and how to conceive it. And so we had paper mache artists who had been used to making small objects. And it was a learning experience for me to see how their creative and intelligence could transform these things that they did in small objects into big screens, which were 8 feet by 20 feet or something like that. It was a big learning experience about how going back to Kumaraswamy, the miniature can be related to the mural-sized thing. But it's also about the kind of richness of that imagination that was very special. But apart from that, I have worked with other kinds of collaboration. I have worked with a Sanji artist all these years with whom first I used to just buy stencils from him. Sanji is an art form that is practiced mostly in the Vaishnav community in the temples in Mathura, where they make stencils to make patterns to decorate the shrines and on ritual occasions. But these are now being sold as art objects for some years in craft museums. But working with him was first a question of just buying from him, but then it became a much more collaborative process when we would. I of course never made the mistake of drawing for him, because that would be, I think, completely crude. But it was that we would share images, we would talk about it and do things together. Now, having said all this and how much we still continue to have working together, I know it is a one-sided collaboration. It is much heavier. The gainer is my practice. And I think that I would like to point out here that I think that doesn't apply only to the way that my art practice depends on another person's worldview, but it is also a concern that we should all have in the art world, where we are beginning to understand the potential of working with other kinds of art makers and makers. But there is always the fear of outsourcing it. And I think that's something that we really need to learn, and to learn from theatre people, learn from our kind of collaborative process to go further.
Anu, would you like to, the process in theatre making, Neelu has spoken about process, and in the authorial, signatorial mention in the book, in an interview with that Belinda interviewed in that text, you mentioned Kasauli, and sorry, but I'm bringing it back to Kasauli at every point, only because that's the occasion that's brought us here together. You mentioned that Kasauli, the coming together in Kasauli of this group of practitioners was a key moment in theatre practice as well. You talk about it like almost a watershed movement in terms of collaborative practice. If you could also expand what exactly you mean by that.
In terms of, let me start by saying that I think it first actually probably affected the method of working, which would mean that there were certain sorts of divisions that we had all learned as theatre students or theatre trainees or young artists or whatever, that there was a certain timeline of making theatre, and that there's the text, there's the reading, there's the actor, and there is the design, and then there is music, and you go into the show. And the fact of the design being discrete, and to this day in Europe and England, it is entirely discrete. There are only very special and very, I think, great works that have now emerged in the last 20 years that will break this chronology, this sequence. And I think that the nature of wanting, the reason to wanting to break this is that at that point at least we felt that each discipline, quote unquote, should be able to leak into the other. So if Nilima, Vidya Rao, Geetanjali and I started together on a text, it had the flexibility at that time to alter. That when Nilima is thinking of an image, then Vidya Rao can actually provoke a discussion by citing Tagore or citing learning of Tagore. She says in the film, in that little documentary, that Tagore is supposed to be a woman's form, but it is taught by men. It's written by men, only performed by women. So in what way is it hers? So that kind of questioning about when a form comes into the practice of making, I think became quite important. And it's something that has a learning that I have been able to, I think I cherish greatly, and has been part of all theatre making from that time. That the sequence of work is all simultaneous, that it all starts together, so it can all actually wash back and change what is supposed to be a beginning. And I think that part is a kind of distributed authorship, I think, which has been very important for any work that I think many of us have done. And I would say that, of course, as in Sundari, for instance, when Nilima would give us a thought of an image which could be possible, a citation, then the actors would have to deal creatively and find a language to relate to the visual. And I want to say, as a aside actually, now it's very, it's a tired aside, but let me bring it up because it's been something that surprisingly one might still hear, is that an actor who's not interested in working with different kinds of material might say to the playmaker or to me or to Nilima, oh, this is too big, it's too grand, it's going to eat me up. And this is a lot of the time in Hindi it goes to mujhe kha lega. And it's a recognition of the fact that it should have been a recognition constantly in the actor's stage presence that she's not alone. She never is alone. So all this notion of there's a hierarchy, ye mujhe kha lega, I can't handle this is beyond me. All these were things that I think we learned, and there were many performers interested in this who were not located as themselves centrally as a storyteller. So I think that was something that was very important. And I think it was important for us, but I would say, and this I cherish greatly, that it's important for the whole set of actors and performers who are also able to articulate working with different disciplines, I think, in that time.
Yes, and also, I mean, it's I think in retrospect it becomes a little easier or clearer in one's mind how one's own practice cumulatively has a collective ethos, as it were, and especially so among women practitioners. And I think that is an impulse, the impulse, the feminist impulse of sharing, of collective making, of dispersion and sharing rather than inward clutching onto a work or an idea or a thought to oneself. And I encounter this even in a much more mundane sense in the practice of bookmaking. Making a book with an author, with a group of people, with a designer, an author or a set of authors, or people who are interlocutors in the editorial process, with editors, with the printer, choosing the right kind of paper. I mean, I keep telling Anuradha how much I miss Vivan, because in the making of art books, he was as interested in the production, in the material form that an art book would take. So these are things that I started reflecting on after hearing my friends, as it were, talking about collaborative practice. So how we instinctively kind of carry out these practices in our day-to-day functioning, and how enriched our practice becomes because of this collaboration. Nilima, one more thing I would like to, this business of, you made a kind of an appeal to artists just now, other younger generations of artists probably to look outward, to collaborate with, not to disperse the authorial signature, as it were. Would you like to add to that? And do you see instances of that happening in today's art world, or do you see a reversal rather than a progressive forward movement? What was it that made you make that appeal just now?
Well, I have to say that the younger generation has gone leaps and bounds in the way that they have used other resources, other mediums, other ways of presenting their work, other kind of relationships with other forms of making. It is so, but it is only because I think that there is art practice is still in some sense remains solitary practice in some ways, and there is a signatorial element still attached to it. And so it's a word of caution, not just to you, to your generation, but also to myself, that when we think of going out into this wonderful, we are very, very, very privileged that we have in our country so many levels and stratas of the production of art, which we don't realize that there are very few other countries that have this. So when we have that privilege, we have the occasion to be making other how should I say, other arenas of art making. We have that possibility, and that can only come through a more equal relationship with the craft you are otherwise outsourcing or reaching out to, or using the resources of. I mean, there's a possibility of, let's say, for instance, no, I think that's a wrong, Australia is a wrong experience. But we do have this, and because we have limited we've allowed such few entry into the art exhibition space from artists from the non-urban sector to come in, that we are depriving ourselves. we are depriving ourselves of that experience of being in part of the movement with them. So then, I think we should do. Years ago, I used to go and learn from miniaturists, and they used to, when I used to ask about them and all that, I was also interested in wanting them to know about my art. They would say, "Ye to modern art hai." And if I was in the showing in, "Acha, tum to bilkul miniature wala sab thi sab." So this divide, is I think something that so many years since is quite noxious. I mean, we should be able to make certain kinds of relationships, and I think the onus is on us because we are privileged.
Thank you. That was deliberately a little provocative. I wanted you to come out and state exactly what you had in mind. Is there anything else that we need to go into, or yeah? I think we could now have open it out to the audience, and if any of you have questions, comments addressed to either Anuradha or Nilima, please go ahead. And I'll leave it to them. I'll moderate. We can have about 15 to 20 minutes of questions and answers. So please go ahead. Maybe you'll have to come up to, if you need to be heard. You have a mic that can be circulated? Okay, great. Yeah, so please just raise your hand and the mic will come to you. And please introduce yourselves. There.
So thanks a lot for coming here, and we are very grateful to have you here. My question to you all is like, how do you see the coming of space in today's, like, as an artisan community practice, which you have seen actually in Kasauli Art Centre, which is the essence to come and to create a group and then form art. And in today's world, like we see in rising internet, like the space is very personal in a sense. Like the collaboration does happen, but the space is absent. The space is very personal when we talk about the internet. And like, do you think like how it will affect art in the process of community practice, and how much do you give importance to art as a community practice?
That's to Nilima. Could you please tell us your name and...
Yeah, myself, Arthshila Singh. I'm from philosophy department.
Is this mic working? Yeah.
I think there's not working. I think that we have many artists who worked with communities in a way that, like, they take from your part of the world, Mira Mukherjee, for instance, has worked with communities and with them, for them. There is Nabdul Altaf, who has done some amazing work in the Bhaktazism. And there are several others who have done that. And I think that this should be an incentive to many young people to extend those terms.
Does it answer your question? No. This doesn't work.
No, it's working too.
Oh, sorry. Okay. Anyone else?
Could I just actually ask Anuradha also to respond to what she asked? In terms of space, right? And you've spoken about atmosphere as well, in a particular place and also the instrument.
Let me. I'll try. Let me.
Neither is working.
I can speak up. I think.
Yeah, you speak.
I think there are two parts to the question. For me, let me try it like this: that I think space as something that is has some relation to sight is also important in theatre making. And I think that it became very important for all of us who had the opportunity to work on site, and that's at the Kasauli Art Centre. And therefore, only one part of it I'm taking is because of this, the fact that space as a physical thing, as a physical atmosphere, became something that in our work in the theatre became very important insofar as if you have rehearsed something in the mountains and you bring it down to the plains, how do you handle that? And it became quite interesting because sometimes we can only express as a depletion. That what was done in the mountains, and if you bring it down into Delhi, something has gone. Of course it's gone, but then one has to find some rematerialization. And I think that rematerialization perhaps is something that has been part of many of our sort of attempts and what we have sought to do in our work in other areas. For me, it has been particularly important as something that I have been greatly attached to in pedagogical ways, as to how for an actor or how for somebody who's working in the theatre, they can rematerialize an experience. That's one part. But I also think that in itself, theatre is about making communities. I think it attempts to do that. But it also, in its own histories over the last several years, at least in a kind of understanding of a post-colonial notion of tradition, in the theatre has been very problematic. And it's been problematic for many reasons. And the one major problem, which I think we are all theatre makers familiar with, that in the 70s it became a funding proposition. How you deal with traditional forms was a funding proposition. The Sangeet Natak Academy thought of it as a funding proposition. You give a proposal in which you're dealing with the traditional form, and that becomes the primary proposal. I don't think it helped very much in building a language. I'm not talking of great works by, let us say, Karanji or Habib Saab, or great works across, and you have traditions of that too, which are dealing with where you repurpose something. I think that the repurposing, at least within my sort of Hindi language, didn't yield very much in terms of rethinking theatre making. But I think working with practices which are outside your immediate urban theatre has been there, but in the Hindi theatre, it has been very curtailed and sometimes often not. I think it has had one life. I think it could have many more lives, and maybe we can think of it as something that can be an ongoing thought now.
Anyone else?
I think mine are always more comments than direct questions, because there's so much that you have said which clearly makes you think in different directions and things like that. And I think what is very important to keep in mind, even though you brought it from this past in the 70s, 80s, 90s into the present moment, that there's been tremendous change, as the person who asked the last question pointed out, because now we do have the internet, and also is a very personal, a very kind of a private space today. We imagine it's private, of course it isn't. But so all of these things. So when we use terms like collaboration, and in this particular case, because it was like so visible in Kasauli, particularly at the time that you spoke of, I begin to question. I mean, it's not even a question because I understand where it's coming from, but speaking about many different languages and mediums, right? So when we're thinking about, say, something like theatre or performance, and we're thinking of something like filmmaking, and we're thinking of something like painting or writing, even when you're working with somebody who is whether it's an assistant or somebody who is going to contribute in some way or the other to the actual work, whatever it is, they're completely different forms of collaboration. And there are some forms like theatre and filmmaking in which you can do nothing but actually collaborate.
Yeah.
There is no possibility of the one, right? So I feel that when we're talking about the different art forms, we have to be very, I at least think, we have to be very cautious about what we mean by the collaborative. So even when you talk about book making, for example, the book making, the final object is a collaborative thing, but the actual writing is, as you were saying about the artist working, is a solitary process, right? How do we then take this process which has happened in the solitary and make it into something which then kind of spreads out and you can share with and make, and this is what I think about in terms of the reader and the writer, make that reader come into your space, right? Or create a space for the reader to share, right? And that is where I would see the collaboration when we're thinking in terms of certain kinds of languages and practices. Because we have to be able to separate these practices as well, because we're sitting in a space where we think of art in capital letters, right? And when we're thinking of these forms of art, particularly when it's the visual, the word function doesn't exist. Whereas when we're thinking of the Sanji artist, when we're thinking of the miniaturist, they think their art and their art does have a function, right? So I think we need to be able to take all these complexities and think about them, like I would say, in a more complex, we have to think about it in a more complex manner to be able to kind of open out the word collaboration and our understanding of it, because we have to be able to see how different things contribute differently to make what.
And different kinds of collaboration, different arts coming together to collaborate or within an art form.
Because if you're thinking in terms of function, what, like as a writer, I would say, what do I want to say? What do I want to communicate? Right? And a visual artist or a performer is also trying to communicate something. When we're taking some of what we think of as the traditional art forms, which are still very much with us, it's not what do I have to say as much as what is this going to do, right? And there is a difference in that, because it takes on a different function. And I think we need to be able, and maybe also this is so much on my mind, because I will be talking about function when I talk about writing. So I think we need to, what tends to, I should probably say my humble opinion, but I think we tend to romanticize our practices to a certain degree, because we are trying to get away from the hierarchies that have been created in the various forms, but it's almost impossible to get away from those hierarchies. We haven't been able to shatter them. So for example, when like you say, you're not just outsourcing, but let's talk and let's see who contributes what to this object or whatever it is that is going to finally be produced. There is still a place from which we stand in a position of power. So I think we need to, because we are concerned about this, we need to start kind of shifting these relationships, shifting them in a real way, not just in the object that we're going to produce, but in our lives. And I know that's easier said than done, but I mean, look at us sitting here.
We're talking about systemic change within the
I'm talking about systemic change, and it's required. And also to be realistic about what each practice requires. Sorry.
Yeah. Please.
So I really thank both of you to bring in the nuances that is there in your individual practice also, and this whole notion of authorship that kind of grows in a certain form. But I think in recent last 50 years there are forms which are independently collaborative. And it's not coming from, and the new areas of practice are emerging which are independently collaborative. They cannot exist individually. And that is where I think the crisis comes. Are our institutions ready to interpret these collaborations as relationship of individuals? I mean, because the exhibition like this, which places so many individual artworks, but also situates it in a larger framework, and the tone of this exhibition is about coming together. But in most of our practices, even coming from painting background or sometimes in theatre also we've seen that the representational mode, especially when it goes into another space from your intimate space of thinking, those collaborations or those methods are not placed in equal terms in terms of the institutional format. I mean, so somewhere I think the institutional way of looking at collaboration also needs to change.
Yeah.
Otherwise, these demarcations will remain, and those forms which are independently becoming collaborative will not be appreciated.
The fact that the Kasauli Art Centre was not an institutional space like that, it was an informal coming together, as opposed to art camps that were conducted by Lalit Kala at the same time, probably. I mean, not that I witnessed either. The art camps, or I was not even at the Kasauli art workshops. Any other from behind?
Really, what you say is so important that I think, even one part is an informal coming together and then a kind of informal building of a practice in a situation. And the other is in institutions where simply the recognition is not there. And I'm thinking, I've not been in touch with the, let's say, pedagogy in a drama school, for instance, for some time. But the fact that it should be registered like that is simply not. And even the fact that in a, let's say, practice-orientated institution like the National School of Drama or other places teaching theatre, the fact that it's a porous boundary between design and acting is not taught. So you still have, even if the experience has been different, but the language of how to put that experience, let us say by a trainee student, is the same. So they will continue to say, this is for me, this design is for me, while they have actually not done that. They've not even experienced it, but the actual articulation in terms of language just hasn't kept pace in the way that it has practice is taught, I think.
So even like from a quote-unquote art perspective also, if you see the Biennale catalogs or different things, most of the artists who work in collaboration with so many other practitioners and all, but when you see the catalog as one image, name of one artist, and the concept, but the thing that goes behind with so many other contributors into the whole process, it's still not in the framework of how we design a whole in that sense, which needs to transform very fast, otherwise we are really not taking into consideration
What I'm saying, because we still have those hierarchies very existent, and so whether it's a conscious or deliberate move to preserve those hierarchies, or whether it just happens even though you're making an attempt to see it, it's there. And I think that needs to be thought.
I'll just add one thing here. I think it's only now in many writings on, let us say, the theatre, where the rehearsal space has been written about. Otherwise, it's all absent, right? It's somewhere happening, and then you see the product and you forget what happened there. So if you don't critique the rehearsal space becomes only a production line. And it's only now, so recent, that you begin to decode the fact that rehearsal itself has history, and the studio is a political, and the rehearsal space is a political space. It has a history that has to be thought about in how you place the director, what table, whether it's this front ways or it's circular. From there, I think that it's not been written about.
In the writing of books or the making of books, Milinder, I would say that of course there are hierarchies, but collective bookmaking has been in existence, especially in editorial,
in
bookmaking.
What I'm trying to say is that
Even in the writing,
process
even the writing
is a solitary process.
No, not necessarily. I mean that's mostly true. That's mostly true, but I think
you can put many voices into a book, but the writing process is
different people can write and make a book also. In fact, we had an interesting experiment which didn't become a book. Nilima, Anuradha and a few other friends of ours, we decided to make a book together on women artists' practice through conversations. And we said we would all just meet in a controlled, circumstance or atmosphere and record each other's conversations, and we would transcribe those conversations and make a book of it. That's a multi-authored book, as far as we are seeing. Yeah.
I'm not talking about the book making. I'm talking about the writing. You know, I mean, these are two different things. Like, you can make a book in many different ways, right? You don't just have to write it all to make a book.
For instance,
Right.
for instance, the kind of structure that you've chosen for your persona, that you have certainly extended your solitariness into a form which brings in other voices.
No, absolutely. But it's not. It is not extending my solitariness, and this perhaps I will be talking about tomorrow, right? When I will be speaking about the writing of the book. So it is attempting to make a kind of book in which the several voices kind of come up. Now, the actual writing that I do is a solitary process, right? The making of the book is not a solitary process.
But maybe, let's say, writing as experience, I'm speaking for Geetanjali, but I think I'm speaking with her in mind.
Yeah.
Was not solitary.
No, it wasn't.
She was constantly hearing actors and including doing things like soliloquy, you know, so she had to produce it, right? So, yeah.
But see, when I wrote the soliloquies for the RTB, you know, my writing was a solitary process which got transformed in the performance.
Yeah, but I think that process, if you look at RTB, is different from what, let us say, the improvisatory process that Geetanjali did for other
So what I'm trying to do is just show the distinction between writing and bookmaking. There are two different practices. You know?
We'll discuss this further tomorrow.
Absolutely.
Because I do disagree with you. I mean, I'm not denying the fact that the general scene is like that, but there are options of bookmaking and of writing that. And we have to take those risks. We have to take those risks as well. Exactly.
That is what we're doing all the time as writers. It's been done through centuries. People are constantly trying to make the changes in the form. But when you actually sit down with a brush in your hand and you paint, you're doing it yourself. I'm actually sitting at my keyboard and typing out what I'm writing. I'm doing it on my own.
But that is,
So, but what emerges, the product that emerges, is something else. You know? So, the collaboration becomes very evident in, say, like I'm saying, in theatre, in filmmaking. There's no getting away from it. Right?
No, there's much getting away. There's enough tradition of getting away from it.
That is true. But what I'm saying is there's several things working at the same time. And here in Kasauli, for example, you have people coming from who actually had many different kinds of practices, who worked together to be able to produce this one thing, this performance, right? Which is very different, you know, from painting, for example.
Can I ask a silly question? What happened to all the backdrops?
I was asking you that. They're lying in your.
I think they're lying in
Vivan's studio. Meaning, which has now become like a storehouse.
I'm sorry, I get very kind of excited.
No, I think it's an important thing to discuss, but we have to agree to disagree on some points.
No, absolutely.
But we need to discuss it to begin with. And I think the very fact that we're having a discussion on the making of different forms of art itself, and that we're considering different forms of practice itself is a step towards dispersing the inwardness or the insularity of the process.
But I think we also need to always be able to see the gaps, the differences, where things come together, where they kind of diverge.
Absolutely.
All of these things are important to see because they're never going to have seen this.
No, not at all.
And hopefully not. Where things have to keep moving on.
No, they shouldn't, yeah. Everyone seems to be... anything else? If we don't have any more questions, then maybe sorry, Archana. Yeah.
That if I ask Nilima, how do we respond to your writing? Like now, from this practice, and if I see the scrolls which you made, then how do you yourself relate? If you get the same from this paper.
I have a basic problem about looking at my older work. That is a generic problem. Then sometimes it gets like that. Sometimes it's bad. Sometimes I stitch myself also. So there are shades of different attitudes. But I think what theatre really gave me was, apart from many other things which we talked about, is a great pleasure on scale. Scale of amplification. That I think was something that was very special.
I'm asking this because I have a lot of Kalawan students. And then when they look at, they've been also debating, when I was in third year I did this and I had an influence of that, and now I don't have. But now people say I always had an influence, but then they don't see that growth. So I just wanted you to have that.
Actually, I'd like to know from you what you think.
I find it a lot of difference actually when I look at what. But both have fantasy. Both imaginary fantasies. Here also I can see it. It's like a poetry. Both has still the poetry. That element is still there. The first element. Though the colors and all have changed. But yeah.
That question goes unanswered. But Nilima remembers old things that may, in fact, in terms of this collaborative practice, when we were discussing it this morning, I was asking Nilima and Anuradha, so Kasauli was the beginning of your collaboration. And Nilima said, no, actually it happened in Delhi. I did a banner for Om Swaha, which nobody... for the room cover ka demonstration.
Demonstration.
Procession ke liye she had done a banner on a sari, which then Anu said, oh yes. So they'd forgotten all that was the beginning as far as she's concerned. She said, I came from Baroda and Delhi was a buzz with all these protests and demonstrations, and I instinctively did a banner. And she said, unfortunately, there's no record of it. We don't have it. It was done on a sari. So she remembers every one of her past works. Whether or not she does want to discuss. No, I don't remember what image I made of it. No photographs or anything. If anybody showed it to me, I would be able to say, I have no recollection.
And I want to add one thing, and I think that's very special because I think we learned from you how not to give too much aura.
Yeah.
And I think we learned it because you taught us that. I think otherwise, no, in that sense, when we would enter, or let us say an actor would enter, they don't know how to deal with the fact that they're working with an image you made. So to be able to transmit the fact that they don't need to be afraid of aura.
You don't make it kind of
Very important. You, in that sense, working with you taught all of us that, that otherwise there is, when you work with the visual, there is a certain sense that, I gave a rather, crude example of what they're saying about khajana, that is one other kind. But the aura of it also sometimes would freeze an actor. You taught them, or you transmitted the fact that it hasn't got a self-sustained aura, which we are not allowed to enter.
Yeah, which is the learning process I also went through. I remember Urvashi, Uttara. At one, Uttara was a very, very celebrated theatre actress who had done many roles, and she was in this production. And she had an inhibition about, she faced fear about standing in front of these baby things and reacting. And something of that must have gone into my kind of picture making. But then also we saw the development of her gestures changing in response to the kind of intervention. So even somebody who was so much of a kind of an actress, who hold people just by their own presence.
Yeah.
I think what I meant by, we shouldn't romanticize that, because life is a collaboration. So why do we have to constantly separate what we do from life? Which is what builds the order, that separation. Anyway, I think what has been said,
people go down there.
Just a couple of points as we're finishing, but just practical things. There is a documentary film that they were referring to, and many of the images are from in the upstairs gallery. So please do watch it. It's not very long, but I think you will enjoy it because you get a sense of all the discussions as well. The other thing is that we have 2 talks tomorrow, starting with Professor Shakuntalam, who will also be speaking about at 5 o'clock the arts and communities written in early Santiniketan. Followed by Vidya Rao about the writing of this book, Kasauli Art Centre, copies of which are available in the library.
Same time, same place.
Same time, same place. And without the Bhojpuri.